Please welcome Mr.Christoph Weigl.
So, good morning. Is it loud? It's on. Yeah. The mic. Huh? Oh, it's okay. Yeah. Okay, good. So, good morning again. Good to see such a big crowd. Very happy to have this session today, and I'm happy that you can actually join the session. So what I'm presenting today is about management issues in facility management. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not qualified to speak about technical or engineering issues, but I hope I'm qualified to speak about management issues, being in management, in healthcare management for 15 years in Southeast Asia. I would like to start with a short introduction, a snapshot of VAMED, what we do, a short intro on facility management, just a few slides, and then really drill deeper on three main management issues: strategic planning, life cycle costing and budgeting, and partnerships. And then conclude with one slide. Sorry, still getting used. So I haven't chosen those three topics accidentally. I chosen them because I still think they are weak points in the Thai FM healthcare system. And I believe there's room for improvement. So I hope today's presentation can actually help you to find a few solutions to some of your problems. So VAMED is part of Fresenius. Fresenius is a Fortune 500 company. It's a huge healthcare company, over 100 years old. And what you see within Fresenius is actually four lead companies. So we have Fresenius Medical Care, which is the world leader in dialysis care, so kidney failures, chronic kidney failures. You have Fresenius Helios, which is the biggest hospital operator in Europe, mostly in Germany and in Spain. You have Fresenius Kabi, which is a pharmaceutical company, mostly nutritional products, oncology products. And last but not least, also the youngest and smallest kid of the family is Fresenius VAMED. And we build, we construct, and we manage hospitals. The next slide is important because it actually tells you where we draw our expertise from. So what we do within VAMED, we are involved in the project business as well as the service business. So the project business is all about planning, engineering, and constructing hospitals, while the service business is about owning hospitals or healthcare facilities and managing and operating them. And part of the operations is always facility management. So we are a vertically integrated company. That's where we get the expertise from. And we are well familiar with the core processes of a hospital, which is the clinical side, and the non-core processes, which is the non-clinical support services. That just gives you a very quick snapshot that as VAMED we are active in the whole continuum of care, We have facilities, we own and manage facilities in prevention, wellness centers, medical wellness centers. We have acute hospitals, and actually our core competency is in post-acute. We own and manage roughly 60 rehab hospitals. That slide already brings us closer to Thailand. Those are just a few projects we have been working on over the past 10 years. We have worked with most of the medical schools, including Ramatibodi, Chulalongkorn, then Khon Kaen, etc., plus also a few other big public hospitals and private hospitals in Thailand and the region. And in fact, our first project ever in Thailand was a collaboration with the Faculty of Medicine Ramatibodi for commissioning the SDMC facility, and that's also the birthplace of RFS. So it's very good to see Professor Aram here today, because we met probably the first time 12 years ago, and that time we had the plan to revolutionize how facility management is done in healthcare in Thailand. So we actually set up, Ramatibodi set up RFS, and we co-managed together with RFS. We helped to set up the organization structure, policies, SOPs, and we invested a lot of time in training and upskilling people. So after 10 years, I'm actually very proud to see this happening today, that RFS has succeeded in its mission, and RFS is hosting such an excellent conference. So when we look into what is FM, and I don't want to spend time on the definitions here, because I'm sure you have heard a number of definitions over the past 2 days. But I've taken 2 definitions from the NHS, one from 96 and another one from 2018. And actually, the core is still providing good service at the best cost, very cost effectively. This is still the essence of the 2 definitions, even 20 or 25 years on. But what has been added is things like a satisfied and comfortable workforce, enhancing user experience. So that means today, the expectations to facility management services has actually increased significantly. And the tools have become more sophisticated. Tools like KPI metrics and output specifications and so forth, which I will mention later. So facility management has a much bigger role to play now than it used to, let's say, 20 years ago. Just to look at what services we are talking about when we mean FM, I think you're familiar with all these services. On the left-hand side, it's more the hard FM services. On the right-hand side, it's more the soft FM services, which are usually either all provided by the FM function or partially. My presentation today certainly focuses more on the hard FM. Next, I would like to show you a video. It's a 3-minute video. It's about the new Mitapap Hospital in Vientiane, Laos. And it was built turnkey by VAMED. So that means we built the entire hospital, we planned it, we put the equipment in, and we put the IT in. And I will tell you afterwards why I'm showing you this equipment. So please, just enjoy. Okay, I haven't shown the video because we are very proud that we actually realized this hospital. I believe we all agree it's a wonderful hospital. Yeah, if you consider it's right in the middle of Vientiane in Laos, so it's by far the most modern hospital in Laos at this time and probably for many years to come. So if you look at FM, right, place, people and processes, I think we all agree it's a great place. It's a great facility with great equipment. The issue there, and this is something I will refer throughout my presentation, is people and processes. So we have a severe lack of resources, financial resources and HR resources to actually manage this place. It's something we may have found in RFS 10 years ago, which has been mastered a long time. I'm worried about this facility that it will actually live up to its expectations. FM strategic planning. I've chosen this topic because I believe there's still a lack of strategic planning in Thailand. Very seldom do I see written policies, written FM strategies. Then FM managers are very seldom part of the management team. Oftentimes there's a lack of clear direction where FM should go in a hospital. And what are the objectives? What do we want to achieve? However, there are leaders like RFS, like other medical schools who have actually adopted strategic FM, and they really show us the way. So if strategic FM doesn't happen, without it, an organization is trapped in a reactive mode with little concern over its long-term future. That's a very clear message. If we only act reactively, we are never going to manage it well. Facility management always comes on 4 levels. There's a corporate and a strategic level, and there's technical and operational FM. Obviously, the strategic facility management has to tie in with the corporate goals. And this can be about what are the objectives we want to achieve as a hospital, what are the needs of our patients, what are the requirements, the standards. Are we going to be a 5-star facility? Are we going to be a 3-star facility? All that is important for the FM function. While on the lower levels, the tactical and the operational FM, it's all about the service delivery. So what's important is that whatever policies has been agreed here cascades down and is communicated to middle management and to the operational staff. And what I see still in most Thai hospitals is FM happening on the tactical and the operational level. Very seldom, and again here I find the medical schools are leading and some top private hospitals, is there a very strategic FM level in place. So the top 2 levels are about policy formulation, and the lower ones are really about service delivery. So if we look at the corporate and the strategic level, then if you look at different types of cultures and characteristics, usually healthcare is actually here. It's quite a hierarchic culture, which means there's a strong structure and a high level of control. So this prohibits change or makes change much more difficult than, let's say, in entrepreneurial organizations. However, over the past years, we have seen hospitals to become more market-oriented. And I think the private hospitals and the medical schools, again, have led the way. So we are going to see more change happening in terms of hospital FM. So the significance of FM has increased, and what should follow from it is actually that the FM managers should become part of the management team, yeah, in order to make direct contributions to the long-term strategy of the hospital. In the past, patients put up with bad service, bad facilities, as long as the hospital provided a good clinical services. So that has changed, right? Now, actually, clients, like in all other industries, they expect a good experience, they expect a good service. So this needs to be reflected in the facility management organization of a hospital. I have included now two facility strategic delivery plans, two examples. There are many more, but I found those two good. They're quite different. This one is from the NHS in Scotland. It's a very comprehensive document. If you're interested, you find the reference here. So it's probably about 40 pages describing in very detail how they strategically want to bring facility services ahead as part of the overall NHS organization. So what they have done here, what you see here is obviously there's a vision statement, and they have set out the objectives they want to achieve. And I will show later how they are going to measure the objectives. So that's a very good example of a strategic plan. There's another strategic plan here, which is from a university hospital in Michigan. This one is more plant operations oriented. So it doesn't include all the other facility services. But nevertheless, what I like about this plan is it has an action plan already built in. So you have here actions regarding customers, financial. Now I need to wear my glasses. Yeah, it's about people and it's about business. So they have listed out a number of actions, for example, here, increasing response times, implementing service level agreements, and so forth, which they can action upon, which makes it a very strong plan and which is something they can then communicate to their FM team, even down to the operational level. I already mentioned the levels which I feel are mostly addressed here in Thailand are the tactical and the operational level. So on the tactical side, it's all about managing quality, value, and risk, which is key to a hospital. So it's about defining the quality, measuring the value which FM is providing to the hospital, and also managing the risk, like developing a risk register and then managing the risk accordingly. While on the operational side, it's really the day-to-day management. That's what most people are familiar with when they hear facility management services. I hope you can read it. It's from the same paper from the NHS in Scotland. Essentially what they have done for every core service they are delivering, they have defined what they call key value measures. So, for example, for the catering services, they would have defined the patient cost per day. For FM services, the total maintenance cost per square meter. For sterile services, how many units have been defect, laundry services, total cost per item, and so forth. So this is a very useful matrix, which can then be further operationalized with additional KPIs. Next, I would like to move on to another important area, which has a big impact on FM, which is the life cycle costing and the budgeting. So I believe everyone is familiar with life cycle costing. So it's pretty much making sure that everything of a facility, of equipment, every cost related to it is included. So from the design to the construction to the operation and maintenance, the repair and the replacement, all the way to the disposal. And this here is that's an average. Yeah, the percentages you see are averages across industries. So after we define the client needs, we actually go into design and construction, and that makes up roughly 20 to 35%. Operations and maintenance usually make up 50 to 70%, and the replacement and the upgrading 10 to 25%. So the specialty about healthcare is that the operations and maintenance costs are proportionately much higher. So if you take the entire life cycle costs, construction is a much smaller portion of the total than operations and maintenance. I would like to refer to our hospital in Laos. So what happened there is client needs were very unclear and unspecific because they did not have the expertise to actually clearly state the needs and the requirements they have. So essentially, we build a hospital based on our expertise and experience. And we're only finding out now what they actually needed. So there has been some readjustments over the past 2 years. We built a top-notch facility, which was funded. It was funded by a Czech Austrian export credit agency. So the funding happened. What I'm now seriously worried about is the big chunk of the life cycle cost. How are they going to maintain and operate the facility in order to keep it up to a certain condition? And unfortunately, that's never part of a construction funding, so that is something the Ministry of Health needs to work out. But of course, we have been helping them to get some strategies in place. Moving on, everyone is familiar with the iceberg diagram. What I just mentioned, right? Most times we look at the capital cost here, which is the building and the equipment. But we may overlook what's following once the building is up and running. As mentioned, what I see in Laos, there's an underfunding here of all the follow-up costs, like operations and maintenance. And that's going to be a serious issue for the hospital management to operate the hospital. If we look at operating costs, as I said, as the biggest chunk of the capital costs, the life cycle costs, you're familiar that in healthcare, roughly 50 to 70%, depending on the region and country, are personal expenses. And roughly 25%, up to 30% is non-clinical, so it's materials and services. And out of this, usually 10 or 8 to 16% is facility management costs. So if we look at the total cost, the life cycle cost, schools and hospitals have something in common, that after 3 to 4 years, the operational costs already exceed the construction costs. So what does that mean? It means actually if you operate a hospital for 50 years, the construction costs are insignificant compared to the operational costs. And you need to make sure at the beginning that operational costs will be optimized. And you can do a lot for it during the design and the construction phase. So what we see here is for hospitals, and this is a German statistic, so in Thailand or in Southeast Asia, this will be more towards 6 to 8 years. But it doesn't change the relation to office buildings, which would be 11 to 12 years in a European context. So with slightly higher construction costs and spending more money on the design, you can actually improve your operations. That's the main message here. So spend more time and money on design and planning to optimize FM operations. And that's what we are seeing in this slide. Again, it's the same message here. Out of the total, the construction is a very small portion. Oh. And this here, the top part is the design costs. So it's at 0.9%. And if you spend a little more time and money on the design, then you can actually reap the rewards later on during 50 years of operations. And that's what I want to show here. It's a very simple, but I think powerful visualization. In the design phase, which is here, you can actually, with a low cost, with a low increased cost, you can achieve a high impact. With a good design, you can achieve a good construction and, more importantly, a more cost-efficient operation, which would follow here. It gets more difficult during the construction and during the commissioning and the mobilization phase. Here, any cost will be high, but the impact you create is actually much lower. The same we see here. The cost to fix any issue becomes much higher as you move from the design to operations and maintenance. But the potential saving becomes much smaller as you move along this path. Hospital staff has to live with good or bad design for 50 years. So whatever we can do in the design phase really helps them and makes operations more cost effectively. So what we usually do is we have a functional, a medical equipment, and an IT planning process in place. So we usually start with a master plan, a clinical service plan, an operational plan, which essentially tells you how the hospital will be operated, an FM, and the business plan. And we have architectural layouts. They come from the client. If the client hasn't got those documents, then we are going to develop them together as high-level documents. So what the consultant can bring in is all the know-how on standards. Healthcare standards, IT standards, medical equipment, infection control standards. And obviously the experience of decades on many projects. And then we bring the consultant and the client go into workshops, and usually that happens department by department. So for example, the pediatric department, the orthopedic department, and they will define the requirements. And what this actually does is it produces very valuable outcomes in the early design phase. So for medical equipment, it produces a list of equipment which will go into the hospital. It already produces specifications, which hospital, which equipment will go into each and every room. What engineering requirements are there? On the functionality of the hospital, it tells you the workflows for patients, staff, and material. That's very critical for the FM function, during operations. You want to have good workflows in place. And it gives you revised floor-by-floor drawings, which the architects then can translate into the building. And on the IT side, it gives you all the IT requirements in order to then implement it. Next, I have just provided a few examples. So for example, that's part of the functional design review. What we usually do is we look at the layouts and we identify concerns. For example, here we identified a few concerns on logistics and traffic flows. We also identified there's not enough storage here So those are all concerns which would badly affect or negatively affect the FM function during operations. So they need to be fixed. That's another example. This is actually at Red Cross, and I've seen Dr. Wijan before, to suggest to change the main entrance, to move it to the ground floor, to extend the ramp. Very valuable information which can solve a lot of problems during operations. We have looked at, for example, here at the CSSD, change the flows of dirty and clean, and we always try to think in terms of cost benefit. It has a high benefit, but actually it has a fairly low cost to change it. And that's always the intention, We don't want to add costs as much as we can. If you look at mechanical and electrical design, the FM function is going to be responsible for fire safety during operations. So you want to make sure fire safety is in compliance with the standards. Medical equipment, it's a very good but simple exercise. Even the hospital can do it. What we do here is we make medical equipment lists per room. So we tell all the equipment which goes into one room, and we draw up the room and we put all the equipment inside with all the utilities, electricity, medical gases, and so forth, to make sure everything will be functioning when FM takes over operations. And we do the same for IT. How many outlets are necessary per room? What's the Wi-Fi concept, data center, and so forth? Now I want to move to a slightly different topic, which has more to do with budgeting. And I would like to introduce you to a few concepts. So what we see here is, we all know that facilities, equipment are aging, they are deteriorating. So on this very simplistic slide, but I think very powerful slide, usually what you want to achieve is that the deterioration of your asset is above your accounting depreciation, meaning you can use your equipment longer than you have it in your books. This provides additional economic value to the company. Where this line will be very much depends on how much budget you are allocating. How much maintenance budget are you allocating to your hospital, to the equipment? If it's a high budget, this line will probably be here. Oftentimes what we forget is that over the time, also the user requirements increase. So usually we estimate that about 1.3 to 2% the user requirements increase every year. So there needs to be a budget in place. And again, talking in terms of life cycle costing, this is often forgotten, for replacements, for upgradings, for modernization. That's very much the same slide. The only difference is that at handover, we have a lot of deficiencies, and many of you may be familiar with it. The construction company hands over the hospital to the operations team, and you find out there are a lot of deficiencies. So if that is the case, your facility, your equipment will actually deteriorate much faster. That means it will age much faster, and you have to repair more, maintain more, and eventually you have to replace and reinvest earlier, which is a financial burden to the hospital. So the message would be, you want to bring in your technical team, your FM team, at a very early stage to make sure they record the deficiencies and they make sure the construction company is rectifying them. And that's what you see here. Most of the deficiencies usually happen during the construction and during the handover phase, and then they decrease. So you need to make sure as an FM team you're already in place here, and you make sure that these deficiencies get rectified, so you don't have the curve which I showed to you before. Again, that's a slightly different message, but I think it's very clear. If you run a lower maintenance budget, so actually the maintenance budget, it should read, is below the specifications. What is happening? In the short to medium term, you don't see any difference to the facility, to the equipment, right? The facility still looks good after 5 years, so does the equipment. It's still operating. The tricky part is that the impact will only show up sometimes after 10 or 15 years. And then it's too late to increase the maintenance budget. You already have to make serious repairs and replacements when this is happening. So the message is, rather spend a good maintenance budget in the early phase, yeah, as we have seen before. Same message here. If we compare a high and a lower maintenance budget, the difference is here, right? The life cycle of an asset which was maintained well, in this case, will be 5 years longer than one which was not maintained well. And this is actually well depicted here. So what's happening is, naturally, after a certain period of time, with a lower budget, you will have to do minor repair and replacement works. If you don't do this, later those repair works and the associated costs will be even higher. So you need to find the right optimum which works for you. That's an example of an air conditioning unit, which I will not go into detail now. But the message is, and that's pretty much the same message, that you can extend the life cycle of an equipment, of an asset, substantially with good service. So in this case, if we look at the AC, ASHRAE would say the lifetime is 10 years, but it's estimated to be 25 years. But that obviously requires good service. So what is the right maintenance budget? How much money should we spend on good maintenance? And this is entirely your choice. So there is a rough guideline that the maintenance budget, in order to sustain a building for 15 years, and this is now looking at the facility only, should be between 2 to 4%. But the 2 to 4% do not include any modernization or upgrading. So this would have to be provided additionally. So that gives you a rough guideline of what you should actually spend on the building. The more money you spend on the building, the slower it will age, the slower it will deteriorate. So in Thai hospitals, and this is really hospital specific because in office buildings, it's quite different. The value is well below 2%. And I think there's a lot of room to actually improve how facilities, hospitals are being maintained in Thailand. Obviously, the maintenance costs are driven by a number of factors. I would only like to go into detail on the service level agreements. And there's a very good slide, which I hope you can read it, very well summarizes what you need to consider. Obviously, it makes a difference if you want to have a showcase facility, yeah, which people admire, yeah, it's a showcase, it's a flagship, or you actually don't bother much about the facility, and what you actually see is a very reactive management or a crisis response. This has an impact on a number of areas, and they're listed out here. So for example, customer satisfaction obviously will be quite different if you go into, let's say, a Bumrungrad hospital, yeah, or if you go into a public district hospital, the facility will look totally different, the experience will be very different. What we always see is there's a different focus on the ratio between preventive and corrective maintenance. Here, it's going to be very preventive, while here, the hospital is in a very reactive mode. The aesthetics, yeah, look totally different between a 5-star facility and the 1-star facility. And I would like to draw your attention to these 2 factors here. That's just what we talked about. The maintenance budget. For this facility, you probably need 4% or even higher, while for a facility of that category, you would probably spend below 2%. And in Thailand, this would probably be in the range of 0.5 to 1%. And this index here actually is it's a measurement of how well your building is maintained and what's the condition, and I will show this in the next slide. So the facility condition index just gives you a KPI of how excellent the condition of your building is. So you want your building to be in the range of at least good. So this means it should be 5 to 10%. This means the total deferred maintenance is rather small compared to the replacement cost. While poorly maintained buildings, they are in this range, and this means that hospitals have to reinvest and to replace assets very quickly. I've provided a few benchmarks. That's a benchmark from one of our hospitals in the Middle East. It gives you the same kind of information here. The ratios are lower during the warranty period than during an average full operational year. That's a study from the US, which gives you a fairly good approximation of what your medical equipment maintenance budget should be. This is a 5% line, and you can see that most of the hospitals have around 5% maintenance costs related to the acquisition cost of the medical equipment. And there's another example, which is for a hospital which we built. It shows up at 6.6%, and it also provides you with the breakdown here into different categories of medical equipment. And obviously, the maintenance quotients are quite different for a diagnostic and radiology equipment compared to other equipment. Again, the ratios of the maintenance quotients we see in Thailand is probably maximum 2% of the equipment value. So a lot can be done here. And I would like to conclude the presentation with a few slides on forging partnerships. So I told you when we entered Thailand, we had a very strong partnership with Ramati Body, with RFS, and that has always been our history. So how VAMED came into being 40 years ago was actually partnering with the General Hospital in Vienna. So we believe in the power and the benefits of partnering if you got the right partner. There's a very good market analysis from Frost and Sullivan, if anyone is interested. It's from 2020 about the FM market. What it does, it also highlights the importance of going into partnerships, into mutually beneficial partnerships. I need to speed up. My time is running out. Outsourcing models. So obviously there are different outsourcing models, and you don't have to outsource, you can insource as well. And there is no wonder drug which tells you outsourcing or insourcing is the right model for you. It's always time specific. Sometimes, depending on your needs, insourcing works better than outsourcing, and sometimes it's the other way around. So we have different types of outsourcing. You can outsource to a single service contractor like the cleaning services. You can package them, cleaning, housekeeping, security, as we oftentimes see in Thailand. You can have a management contractor who just manages those services, a total facilities management company like ISS, PCS, and those companies who actually bundle the whole type of FM services. Management agents, which is a lesser known model, and last but not least, there's always consultants who can help you. The benefits we usually see are the ones listed out here. So it's oftentimes about elimination of bureaucracy, elimination of duplication of tasks, then sharing of experience and expertise. I think that's very important for hospitals who have no strength in FM. And if you look at Laos, they have no expertise whatsoever. So what we have actually done is we have introduced them to a company which is now building up the skill sets for at least maintenance services and cleaning services to be provided to that hospital. That's a very lengthy exercise, but hopefully this will help the hospital to manage the assets better. Then it's all about process simplification, standardization, and cost and service transparency. I remember well, 10 years ago, 15 years ago in Ramatibodi, there was no FM budget. Yeah? It was all one big budget. So now, 10 years down the road, the faculty clearly knows how much money they are spending on FM. This here is a simplified model, which is a key message though, because what it tells you is that these benefits usually cannot be reaped within 1 year or 2 years. And that is a deficiency, let's say, in how FM is managed in Thailand, because most contracts are 1 year, certainly in the public system, but we see longer term contracts, 3 to 5 years, and that is key to actually make it possible for both the hospital and the FM partner to realize the benefits. It takes time. There are critical success factors, and I think I've mentioned most of them. I would like to highlight this one because that seems to be an issue at most hospitals. It's important to treat contractors and partners as equals, yeah, as you are as much as part of the organizations. Treat them equally to employees and make them part of your organization. As I mentioned, the time horizon should be long-term, can be up to 20 years, and then you will reap the benefits. And I would just like to give very quickly an example which has come full circle, because we took over this FM operation in 2006, and we now handed it back to the government of Berlin in 2018. So it's really from handover to hand back. The Charité University Clinics is a very complex university hospital in Berlin. It's one of the biggest in Europe. You can read the details here. So they had a plan to outsource all non-clinical support services and to bring in expertise from a private partner. But at the same time, they also wanted to achieve huge cost savings, and that was huge, but they knew it's possible. They wanted to let the FM provider lead the day-to-day management, but they still wanted to have a say in management, and I think that's very important so the hospital feels safe and in control. This was the structure that time. So essentially you have Charité holding 50%, and VAMED and 2 partners, we held 49%. So if you think at the hand back, when we handed back the operation, it was a very simple share transfer. All that was needed, and I think this is important for any future operations you may want to consider, all you do is Charité takes back those 49%. So with it comes all the staff, come all the assets, and whatever is in the operations. I mentioned it was a very broad range of services, literally all the non-clinical support services. CFM had very clear targets, what they want to achieve. Most importantly, maintain the quality, but achieve huge cost savings. And overcoming rigid structures and unified all the locations they had. There's a few more. Yeah. So when the contract was signed, and that's something I want to highlight as well, we only had 1 week from signing to mobilization. And if you kind of move into that partnership, you need time to mobilize. So you should give your partner more time. So it was literally the worst start the partnership could have. It was a cold start. We continued with the existing staff, We continued with the existing staff, with the existing contracts. There was no harmonized system. There was a lack of infrastructure. So it was a really difficult and very tough challenge. And the employees of the client, because they didn't know what's going to happen, were certainly very demotivated. So we put an implementation strategy in place, which is listed out here. And this implementation strategy was then supported by a communication strategy. So what we found, most importantly, you have to communicate with every stakeholder, and most importantly, the staff, so they know what's going on and they feel confident and they feel motivated. So this implementation strategy was put in place successfully. The communication strategy saw a lot of roadshows, a lot of meetings with staff, with management. It had management workshops, information meetings with staff, and so forth. And a year later, or 50 months later, we took stock. And what we found is we had successfully completed the migration. We had actually kept the budget, and we have even achieved a small surplus with a profit. And we had integrated 2,300 staff. But if you don't have to do it the hard way, that certainly helps. Yeah? If you give more time to the partnership to form and shape. So after 13 years, and it was a political decision by the government of Berlin that time, because the government became socialist, so they wanted to manage it differently. They decided they want to have Charité back, and that's what happened. But essentially, it was a very successful partnership. I'm not saying there were no hiccups, there were no problems along the way, but overall, all the budget goals, the cost savings, the quality targets were achieved. Customer satisfaction was certainly increased, staff satisfaction, the staff attrition rate was a lot lower, so staff liked to work, and the contract was in fact extended 3 times from the original 5-year contract. That's another interesting case study, and that's pretty much the last slide. If you're interested, the NHS Property Services has a lot of case studies on a lot of different topics. This is about insourcing cleaning services to all their 3,000 properties. So when they were formed in 2013, they decided cleaning services is a core service. We want to provide it in-house. Again, it's about different objectives. So for them, in-housing was the right thing to do. What they achieved with this exercise was not only they increased the quality, but also they saved about £40 million, yeah, which they could actually give back to the NHS system. So again, that's a very wonderful story. Different requirements, so for them, the in-housing certainly worked. And that really takes me to the last slide of the presentation. My conclusions. So I can only recommend to have a very clear FM delivery plan And this plan then needs to be communicated, cascaded down to the frontline workers on the frontline workers who's actually doing the work. Another conclusion is money and time invested in good planning and design is money well spent. And I hope I was able to demonstrate the benefits of spending a little more time and money during the design phase. This will help FM during operations. Set sufficient budgets. And I'm not saying, and we all know budgets are limited, but we have to set and we have to convince management to spend at least sufficient budgets to make FM work. Empower the facility manager and make him member of the management team. Literally, FM is still housed oftentimes in the basement, right? If you go to FM operations in hospitals, that's where FM is. That's where FM you would expect. That has changed, and that needs to be further changed. FM needs to become a management function which is well represented in the management team. If outsourcing is a choice, and it's not always a choice, then if you have chosen the right partner, you need to place a high level of trust in the outsourcing partner and give as much freedom as you feel comfortable with. That's important, because only if you give this expert freedom, he can actually come up with innovative approaches, innovative solutions. In Thailand, we oftentimes tend to just contract out labor, or we just measure how often the person cleans a toilet. So it's by frequency, but actually what we want to see is the output, how well it's done. And this you can only achieve with innovative approaches, with output specifications rather than input, with KPIs. You can still maintain a level of control. It should be low, but it should be well in place through service level agreements, output specifications, KPIs, and so forth. But you need to retain as much control as you feel comfortable with. It's important that the hospital, the management feels comfortable. And last but not least, really allow for a long-term approach of outsourcing in order to reap the benefits of this exercise. So with those conclusions, I would like to leave you. I hope there was bits and pieces for everyone to take away from my presentation. And again, I would like to thank RFS for inviting me. And apologies that I overdrew the budget, the time budget. Thank you.